A few weeks ago, I was moving some stuff around in my room and accidentally broke the glass on my window. It was a small crack and didn't fully break, but it was enough that cold air and condensation were getting in and making my window ice up. So I threw a space heater in my room to try warming it up. Now we have an old house, and if we have two heaters at the same time, the fuses blow and shuts the power off. The other night got particularly cold, so I plugged in the heater to the outlet closer to my bed. This outlet was controlled by the light switch, so when I turned on the switch, the heater goes on. When it got time for bed, my room was warm, so I turned out my heater. I told my parents my room was warm enough, so they put their heater on for the night. So fast forward to about 2 a.m. I hear some noises in my brother's room. I think nothing of it and I just shake it off. I just laid there and the noise had stopped, so I laid back down to try and fall asleep. Then I started hearing noises in the kitchen, which was odd as nobody would be rummaging through the kitchen drawers at this time of night. I start to get a little worried and check my phone. I see a snap from my brother from about 1 a.m. and he was out getting wasted with friends, so I calmed down and think he just got an Uber. I was wide awake at this point, so I checked my texts and emails and got back to Snapchat. This is when I was really freaking out. On the stories, my brother posted 13 minutes ago at a buddy's house who lived more than 20 miles away. It wasn't him in the house. Reading too many stories, I had put an old broken hockey stick in my room in case of emergencies. Not the best weapon, but it's all I got. So I quietly get out of bed to turn on the light to find it. I had forgotten my heater was plugged in. So as soon as I flipped on the light switch, the lights went out. But so did the rest of the power. It also just so happens that on the end of the house is where our ECO's detectors, and that's when the power cut. It beeps loud. Whatever the case was, this startled whoever was in my house, and the kitchen door opened quickly. I woke up my parents to let them know what happened. Once we got power on, we noticed my brother's room window was wide open. We saw a footprint beneath my window, but thankfully the ice had frozen the window shut from the outside. Whoever was in my house climbed into my brother's room and was rummaging around the house. The bags left over under the Christmas tree had been torn all through, and all the kitchen drawers were opened. We contacted the police, who took down the information and said this kind of behaviour is normal around the holidays. People find empty houses and look for gifts, cash, things of that sort. I don't know what would have happened if I come face to face with the guy and my hockey stick, but I hope I never have to find out. When I was 20, it was really hard to find work in my hometown. I eventually managed to get a job though as an administrator. I don't know what this sort of place is called in English, but I'll describe it for you. People who commit very serious crimes, usually arson, murder or similar, who are believed to suffer from mental issues or personality disorders, are placed there instead of a normal prison. I rarely interacted with the interns, apart from being the one who let them in and out the gate when they had reasons to be outside the facility, and then always escorted by the guards. There was one man, a short and broad dude from the Philippines, who always looked at me with the creepiest smile you ever saw, eyeing my ID badge closely every time. I, of course, had no right to know what those people had done to end up in this place, but my boss felt the need to tell me about this guy. Watch out for him, he said. He's a serial killer and an arsonist. Never let your guard down. People think he is stupid, but he's not. He's actually over average intelligence. The summer turned into fall, and in September that year, I left that job to go back to university. It wasn't until 2 years later in December, just before December, that it happened. I was shopping for a bracelet for my sister when I hear a whisper next to me. "Hello, Josephia." I turn around and find myself eye to eye with the stalker guy. He had remembered my name too. I didn't buy the bracelet. I left in a hurry, certain that he had only been out for one of his short visits outside, and that the guards were close by watching. They do that to let the interns train for being let out again. They give them freedom under a watchful eye 1 hour per week or so to see how they handle it. I didn't see any guards I recognized, but I was sure they were there. I went home, my sister and I on flat, each on the top floor of an apartment building, and when we were both home, we keep our doors open and kids and pets can roam freely. Between our homes, we were in my flat, decorating the Christmas tree, when I heard steps. Not the light steps of my niece, not the fast steps of my fiancé. It has the heavy, slow, determined steps of an arsonist. He had found me, and he was on his way up. I threw myself at the door, closing it shut. Mrs. had no idea what was going on, but I told her to get the kids, go into the bathroom, lock the doors, and call the police. I stood by the locked front door, listening to the steps. I could hear him roam around in my sister's apartment. He had found her Christmas cards and was reading the names of her children out loud. Then he started searching for something while whispering happily. My sister, always a rock, was keeping the kids calm in the bathroom while I was listening to him merrily explaining that he needed tools that could break the lock open. Since I knew who he was and the police knew who he was, they arrived very quickly and soon the situation was resolved. It turned out that since there were few places to keep those people, some had been let out early to make room for those concerned more dangerous. I guess he found me by chance that day in the store and decided there and then to go after me. It was a frightening experience, and if my boss hadn't warned me about this man, I wouldn't have acted as fast as I did. I headed out to my local mall a few days ago, determined to do some serious Christmas shopping. As a bit of a reference, I'm only about 5'5" and quite thin. I had a shaggy pixel cut and preferred the comfort of big t-shirts and skinny jeans most of the time, so I get mistaken for about 12-year-old boy a lot more than I would like to admit. So there I was, Christmas wrist in hand, ready to take this thing on like a champ. I had more money than I have ever got for Christmas shopping. I was really excited to get some excellent gifts for my best friend and my parents. I was walking along the ground floor, heading for the stairs, when I passed this lady who was giving me out hand lotion. She had a few small packets in her hand and a larger bottle on the little table beside where she stood. Okay, cool, I think to myself. Grab a sweet-ass lotion packet and keep going. I didn't want to be rude and just keep walking, so I took the lotion and smiled in sort of a thanks for the lotion lady kind of way. Big mistake. Before I had the opportunity to keep going, this woman grabbed my wrist and let out a squeal that would hurt anyone's ears. "You keep your nails natural." Hell freaking hell. Yeah, I do. I clean for a living, so there's not much point in keep getting them done unless I'm going somewhere special. "Sure," I said, and tried to wrench myself free. To my dismay, this lady has a hold of me like a hungry animal, and I knew that I'll be stuck listening to a sales pitch. I was a bit confused as to why she had picked me out of this entire crowd of people walking, especially because of the boots and stubbed jacket, usually scared of potential creeps. Unfortunately, all the leather and studs in the world did nothing for my baby face, so I probably still seemed easy prey for this asshole. She's all, "Look how great this makes your hands and nails," kind of way. while all I could think of how do I get free. My hands were all scarred for her holding on to me for so long. I attempted to get away by letting her know that I wasn't interested and that I had to get back to shopping before it got too late. She batted her iris and said, "Lucky me, since I was so cute, she would give me an entire set for the low price. 20% off. If I followed her to go and get it from her stand upstairs, I had just come from the top floor of the mall. Since there were exits/entrances on both floors, and I knew for a fact that the only kiosk up there was an eyebrow threading place. Like hell, I was going anywhere besides GameStop to get my little brother a new game for Christmas, so I declined. She tightened her hold and just repeated the sales pitch, this time asked me weird questions in between, trying to get me to convince me to buy this lotion. How old are you? 19. Where do you go? To school. I graduated. Do you have a sister? No. Where's your boyfriend? Don't have one. I tried again to tell her nicely because I hate hurting people's feelings, to fuck off and let me get back to Christmas shopping. When she stared dead into my eyes, she said, "Are you alone?" A million little alarms went off in my head and I lied and told her I was with my dad. I looked around and asked which one he was. I pointed out the most imitative looking guy I could find and she launched back into trying to sell me this product at warp speed, like she was in some sort of hurry. I told her again, more firmly this time, I am not spending any money on a hand lotion, and I started to walk off in any random direction. Still holding my wrist, I insisted that I come with her to see more of the products she was selling, because surely I would want something, despite the fact that every freaking word out of my mouth said the complete opposite. I yanked my arm free and stood my ground, preparing to defend myself if she tried pulling me with her again. I'm not buying anything from you. I need to get back to shopping. Before I could turn away, she asked what I used to wash my face. A bit caught off guard, I told her that, and she began launching a barrage of insults at me like, "You're too pale, your skin's too dry." Featuring my personal favourite, it looks like a shredded lizard. Ouch, that hurt. I didn't put any stock into her petty attempts to insult me, because people had complained me on my skin before, and I liked it that way. I looked not that bad, from my experience. I walked away. Instead of throwing anything back at her, I headed upstairs to finish shopping, but before I left the mall that night, I marched my dry lizard skin right over to the nearest mall cop and informed him that he had some rude-ass people working in the mall. I wasn't sure who else to tell, so I wasn't too surprised to see him scrunch up his face in confusion. I expected him to direct me in some sort of complaint desk or something similar, but nothing could have prepared me for what he said next. "We don't sell that here." Well, brilliant. I described the woman and told him what brand of lotion she tried to get me to purchase, but he only shook his head and told me the vendor for that particular brand had not been coming here for that mall for years. On my way out to the parking lot, I passed the spot where she literally confronted me. There was no woman, no lotion samples, no vendor cart. I later asked my cousin who worked at the mall if there's anyone who's selling that lotion. She said no, and a quick peek at the mall's online directory confirmed it. I hate to think where we would have ended up if I had followed her. This happened a few years ago while I was in high school. I was 17 at the time. I grew up in a small town and my mother and sister and I moved to the larger city. I was home alone with my little sister who was 3 and my mum regularly worked night shifts and I was a built-in babysitter. It was winter just before Christmas, so by about 5 p.m. it was black outside.
This happened around 9 PM. I would let my sister stay up late with me, and once she fell asleep cuddling with me on the couch, I would move her to her room. This helped to eliminate temper tantrums about bedtime, so we were laying on the couch when our dog started to lose his mind. The dog was a big fluffy basset hound named Matilda. She was incredibly sweet and would rarely ever bark, but at this point she was growling and the fur on her back is standing up. I immediately knew something very wrong was happening, and I picked my sister up and brought her to the washroom, which had no windows. I sat her in the tub and told her not to move, and I locked the door from inside and shut it. I go back to the living room, my sister's safe and sound, and grab my cell phone ready to call for help if I needed to, when someone starts pounding on the door like crazy. I look through the people and I see a man standing outside, his face covered in blood. Matilda is still losing her mind, and she's trying to force herself between me and the door. My heart is pounding in my ears, and it feels like my stomach is about to fall out of my butt. I have no idea what to do, so I move away from the door and just stand there, silently freaking out. The banging gets louder, and then I start to hear voices and yelling, and this guy is pleading with me to open the door. I go to the peephole again, and there's just another guy, beating on the blood-covered guy. At this point, I was a small defenseless 17-year-old girl, and there was two extremely large men outside. One of them is beating the crap out of the other guy, covered in blood, and he's begging me to let him in the house. I finally call 911 and I give them the necessary information while I'm shaking uncontrollably, and they send police, fire and ambulance. I generally don't think I made any sense during the phone call. I'm surprised they were able to narrow down what my address actually was. When the scene was finally taken care of, a police officer knocked on my door. We later found the bloody guy was jumped through a block or two away and was beaten pretty badly. He made a run for it and made it to my house, and the dude that was assaulting him called with him. At this point, my dog was going absolutely ballistic. My toddler sister was locked in the bathroom, crying hysterically, and I feel like I'm about to die for how adrenaline is pumping through my body. I open the door for them, and part of the front of it is covered in blood from the hurt guy pounding on it, and I just break down. I'm still shaking and shivering from everything, and I just start sobbing. I managed to get my dog to relax enough to let the officers come inside, and they helped me and my sister out of the bathroom, and they called my mum at work to tell her what happened. They take down my statement about the whole ordeal and stay with my sister until my mum got home. Needless to say, that night my mum, my sister and I all slept in my mum's room. In hindsight, I know the hurt guy wasn't trying to scare or hurt my sister. He was just trying to get help, and I felt terrible I didn't let him in, despite it being the right thing to do.
About 4 years ago, I moved in with my sister, who was 2 years older than me. She got the apartment around June 2010, so when she got a Christmas card the following Christmas addressed to someone named Hilda, we didn't think much of it as we thought it was probably for the person who lived here before us. One thing about the card was odd though. The only signature was a male's name, and then the name of the town. Our particular is known for its mental institution for dangerous insane criminals. We brushed it off as a mistake, figuring the person who lived here before didn't give the new address to the person who was sending the card. We had almost forgotten about it until the same thing happened the following Christmas. It was signed the same sender as received the year before. I was a little creeped out since we now remembered that the person living here before us was an old man who passed away. After living here for decades, we brushed it off once again. Now this is getting even weirder. My sister got both of our parents' surnames since they didn't marry until a month after she was born. She has decided to use our mum's name, which is more uncommon, and I have decided to use our dad's name, which is the most common surnames in Sweden. This is important because the next Christmas 2012, they've moved back home about 20 miles away from in the middle of nowhere. A couple days before Christmas, my sister came to live with us during the holidays. The next day, there was a new card in our mailbox. He had my sister's address on it, as usual, but he was now waiting for her in our dad's mailbox. The card couldn't possibly have gotten there by the mailman, since there was no connection between the two addresses. Still, I had print on the stamp and proving that it was sent with the mail. The only explanation I can think of is that whoever sent the card must have picked it up for my sisters when noticing she went home, and then somehow, probably through Facebook, figured it out she was staying here for the holidays. This is starting to get kind of creepy, and I would really appreciate if I had any advice. But to this day, I still think the same guy that he gave my sister those two cards from the past two Christmases found where my dad lived and sent her that card. Okay, so I've known for a while I wanted to submit the story, but felt odd about it since I had still friends with some of the guy's family that would feel like a total shitbag if was seen. However, I've been home with the kids reading today and been pissed that I'd read all of your stories and was freaked out by creepy material. So being part of the solution, I guess, here we go. I am a member of the slam poetry scene. Basically, it is an excuse to get people to listen to performance poetry by adding a competitive element to things. After running for a small scene in my city and wanting to branch out and push my career further, I started visiting places within driving distance that I could lead me to Charlotte NC. I started at their local team venue where you compete to be the part of the squad that goes to a national competition every year. I was doing well and was accepted into the local queue pretty quickly. This led to longer stays and featured that I saw more of the other venues in the city. I started going to ones that was particularly popular and good for selling CDs. That's where I met him. He worked at a bar, occasionally got on stage and shared shitty poems. He was the brother of the host and everyone knew and liked him. He started talking to me more and more, although in my loose days searching for acceptance anywhere, somewhere, something always kept me near. I gradually accepted the drinks he sent over, smoked the weed with the group in the stock room between sets, and hang out with parties and events. I always had the tickle in my gut warning me not to get too close, but over a year or two, we continued to be friends. After a while, he started calling and texting me more often, poking me on the FB daily, sending me messages about wanting to be more than friends, and he wanted to find a snow bunny and settle down. Again, I never entertained it. There was something gnawing me, the crazy in his eyes, too hard to miss. I eventually moved out to Denver to take the position teaching poetry and worked at a friend's law firm. The second Christmas I was there, I got the call. A friend from Charlotte replying the following. He had found his white girl and gotten married. He seemed happy at first, but slowly began fighting more and more. It spilled over the venue, and often they had to be separated by friends, but more from physically attacking one another in public. One friend later, thinking back, remembers the last time we saw them together. Him pushing his wife, followed by the throwing a drink in his face and scratching his deep neck enough to draw blood. She said after the couple had been dragged away from each other, she sat with him and smoked a cigarette. She says she laughed and said, "You guys are going to kill each other." Around Christmas last year, his wife had just started coming to the bi-weekly events they both attended regularly. He explained it away that they were on a break, Time goes by, no one really questions that they hadn't seen or heard from her in a while, thinking she was breaking from the whole scene in order to put distance between her and her husband. Her parents, however, haven't heard of her daughter since Thanksgiving dinner. They would call him, he would say everything was fine and blow them off. This continued a week after Christmas. Knowing their daughter would never miss a holiday, a week without a call, they called the police and sent them to the couple's home for a well-body check. The cops arrive, knock on the door, and are let in. They ask them, "Where is she?" He replies, "In the bedroom." He shows them to the room, and she's laying there, dead for weeks, rotting in the bed. Oh, and he killed a dog, little dog too. During this time, he had been attending events, hosting hip-hop nights, even publishing a blog making a marriage work on one of the local organization sites, never once letting one that every night he was going home and sleeping with his murdered wife. The sickest part of all, he has a child from another relationship, a daughter whom he gets to celebrate with every other holiday with. That Christmas Day opened gifts and had dinner, cuddled up on the couch and watched movies less than 100 feet from a decaying stepmom. I don't know what would have happened if I ever had taken him up on his offer to date, but I do know now, and my gut are going to stay on speaking terms, and I will always listen. So this happened around Christmas time a few years ago. I had taken my 5-year-old niece to the mall to get her picture taken with Santa. While we were standing in the line, I noticed a little old man and a lady sitting on the bench, watching the kids, wanting to see Santa. The old man came up to us and told my niece that she looked very cute and told him thank you. And he went back to sit on the bench with his wife. We got the picture taken and been waiting a while for the picture to be printed. I asked the photographer why our picture hasn't been printed yet. He told me that my mother had already gotten the picture and pointed at the old lady who was been watching us in the line before. I went after the old man and presumably his wife and told them to give the picture back. The old man seemed embarrassed and told me that his wife grabbed our picture by accident. She had meant to take their granddaughter's picture. He apologized and I had a weird gut feeling that something was off about them. Next, I took my niece to go to the merry-go-round, and magic, the old people were there too. Still without any kids, the lady waved at my niece and smiled a big toothless smile at us. At this point, I decided it was best if we left the mall. I took my niece to get lunch at a favourite restaurant, and is almost the way across town from the mall. I felt more relaxed as we had lunch, completely forgetting about the weird old people from before. As we were driving home, my niece spotted a playground that is close to a very different, much smaller mall. She begged me to stop at the playground. There was a young man there with a little boy on the swings, so we weren't alone. Another car pulled into the parking lot shortly after we got there. We played for a little while, and I noticed that no one had gotten out of the car. I looked at the driver's side of the car, and sure enough, it was the same old people from before. They had followed us from the mall to the restaurant and then the playground. The man was staring straight at my niece like he was haunting us. I noticed that he had his arm down and was moving up and down, and he clicked. He was masturbating in his car. I didn't want to scare my niece, so I alerted the young man who was also there. I got my niece into the car quickly and drove into this mall parking lot and called the cops and the mall security. I didn't want to stick around long enough for my niece to see this man getting arrested, so I gave the cops my number and left to my dad's work. Well, I figured we would be safe in case the old people followed us again. The cops called me back a few hours later and told me that by the time we had gotten there, the couple was gone, but they were looking for the description of the car I gave them. just makes me physically sick every time I think about it. That the fact that these old people are out and about and seem totally harmless, but they are preferred sex offenders or even worse, kidnappers. My daughter doesn't really know anything about this, so I'll have to tell her someday, but I'm dreading it. So this occurred many years ago, but it will forever stay with me and change my views on allowing my kids to have their own separate phone line. It was a few weeks after Christmas and my parents had got me my own personal phone with my own separate phone line because it was a cool thing back then, because the cell phones were big. And I had given my friend's number because who wouldn't, right? Anyway, it was about 3 AM and I had been sleeping when my phone began to ring. I thought, that's odd, who could be calling me this early? We all have to be up for school in the morning, so I answered it, but all could be heard was breathing on the other end. I laughed it off as someone was messing with me and hung up. I tried returning to sleep, but my phone rang again. This time I answered it and said, who is this? Nothing but just breathing again. At this point, I was beginning to get irritated. I told him to stop calling me and hung up. Laid down for about 30 minutes when my phone rang again. That morning, I was mad, so I answered it and said, this isn't funny, I'm trying to sleep. I have school in the morning, stop calling me. This time there was a reply. It was a man's voice. Sounded very gravely, and he laughed and said, I can see you. You're very pretty, why don't you come out and play in the snow with me? With that I hung up and started crying. I ran to my parents' room and woke up my mum, telling her what happened, and she woke my dad up and made me tell him what had happened. So they both and my dad goes into my room and checks the windows and everything, made sure all the locks on the door were locked, and proceeds to tell me it was just someone playing a sick joke and that everything will be fine, and tells me to unplug my phone from the outlet. I finally go back to sleep until my mum wakes me up again for school. I get up and start getting ready, open my blinds to my window that leads into the backyard. I noticed on this very frosty morning that there were handprints all over my window. I called my parents in there, totally freaked out. My dad immediately calls the police. The police comes out to take a report and looks at the evidence, and they went to go to the backyard. Sure enough, there were a set of footprints in the snow that led up to my window. They had gone from the front of the house to the back of the house and to the back door and backed up to the front door. The police think the guy tried to get into the house. The Christmas season is the most wonderful time of the year. All the candy, the presents, the decorations, and Santa Claus, the jolly old elf that brings gifts to all the good boys and girls over the world. With his big belly and red suit, I used to love this time of year, but you will soon read why that changed. I was 11 years old, and the 1st of December I laid in bed and my mother scolded me for something I had done that day, and she ended with the cliche, you were getting coal and switches for Christmas this year. As I drifted off to sleep, thought to myself, if she thought I was bad today, she had another thing coming. I was wakened in the middle of the night by the sounds of heavy breathing, and so as most children would do, I hid under my bed. I heard a raspy voice said, hello naughty boy, I've come to take you far away. There is nothing you could say or do. There was no need to scream and no need to fight, because one way or another you were coming with me tonight. It ripped away the covers, so stood a monster of a creature with twisted black horns and draped with old crimson coat. His face was of old dry leather with hollow eyes and long crooked teeth. Next thing I know, it shoved me in a basket with other children. Then everything went black. When I came to, I was in a freezing cold with others around me sobbing. They were in a makeshift cage. There must have been 30 kids beside me. Everyone was confused and scared. Then the creature came into the room, unlocked the cell, and snatched one of the other children. As he did, he snarled, "The bad for the good. It's all about sacrifice, you see. Your sins are delicious and you will all feed me." And just like that, he sunk his teeth into one of the victims, and he wailed in pain. The creature left with him. Throughout the days, the monster would send these little creatures in for the next victim. You could see the sorrow in their eyes as they were carried out for his work. From time to time, the monster would come in to hand-pick his next meal, and every time he did, he was a little fatter, and his hair began to grow. It was almost like as if we were witness to the dead coming back to life. It started out with one child every couple of days, then one a day, and now he would take 2 or 3 at a time. We made our plan to try and escape, but to no avail, and the days dragged out, and I was the last child left in the cage, and I knew that today would be the day that the creature eat me. It had been a while since he himself had come to collect his meal, and I could only imagine what he looked like now. Visions of the monster with his grotesque skin spun around in my head. Then I heard the now familiar sound of a lock opening and someone walk in. My time has come. I'll be the next meal for the monster. As he approached me, I noticed something was very different. His beard was full and his cheeks were merry. The coat that once was very too big fit him perfectly. He was fat and happy, and he looked like a jolly old man, not threatening at all. And then he spoke. "It's Christmas Eve, child. There's no need to be frightened." I cried out in anger, "What kind of monster are you?" "Santa Claus," he chuckled. He saw the look of confusion on my face, and he laughed in his deep laugh and began to speak. "It's all about sacrifice. It's simply to see. I take the bad and reward the good, and it pleases me. I'm Krampus to the bad, but Santa to the good. This part of my life is misunderstood. This makes sense to me now. I'd always wondered how a man living in the North Pole stayed so full and heavily with no vegetarian or any source of food." He smiled at my realization and said, "December is my month, my time to thrive, and I bet you're wondering why you are still alive." I nodded, and he bent down and he said, removing his hat, the horns shone bright. "Every year I do this. Every year it's the same. Every year I release one, so the world will remember my name." I looked at him puzzled, and he picked up on my confusion and continued, "The reason why I live, the reason I survive, is that all the children believe I'm alive. All the other old gods like me have done out of my existence and ceased to be. The world forgot who they are, but not old Santa Claus, not so far. You will tell me your story, you will tell me your tale. Though many won't believe, some of them will." I passed out and woke up on my front porch. I beat on the door with all my might, and my parents came down. We were reunited again. I told them what happened, but just like Santa, though many won't believe you, some of them will. The only part they seemed to believe was I was with Santa, and they forgot about him, looking like a monster or eating children. So the spirit of Christmas lives on. The only reason I'm writing this after all these years is because my neighbour's little boy was taken last night from his bed, and that little fella had been holy terror all year. He read my warnings, no matter how sincere they were. I did all I could for him, but the boys will be the boys, and will answer for it, I'm afraid. I leave you with this. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. His mouth waters when you've been bad, so be good for goodness sake, because he is coming to town. Personally, the last half of 2017 had been pretty exhausting. The most draining part, both emotionally and physically and financially, had been the laborious task of moving my father in to an aged care facility due to his rapidly advancing dementia. He lives in Tasmania, where I grew up, and I am currently living and working in Bash Bain, which is about 250 kilometers to the north of Tasmania. I had been making the 3.5-hour flights down to Tasmania about twice a month to solve my dad's situation. I had been busying myself by fixing up his empty, depleted home in order to get it ready to be sold. I moved out all of his furniture and belongings, save it for a pack of blankets and pillows I turned into a makeshift bed on the floor while visiting. The house is situated in a semi-rural area surrounded by overgrown trees and bushes. It's an old house and it's damp, everything creaks and there is certainly no electricity, which made the night very creepy. The house itself is not very secure, no alarm system, no doors have locks, but a forceful nudge will pop open the door. I flew in on Christmas Eve in the late evening, picked up my hired car to make an hour-long drive down to the house. I stopped at a mate's house who lived about 10 minutes from my dad's place, who have a few beers and shoot the shit about the year that just passed. After a couple of hours I realised I should properly surpass the legal blood alcohol limit to drive. My mate's legendary wife dropped me off at my dad's and offered to come back in the morning to pick me up to go back to their place to get my car. A Christmas miracle, if you ask me. I entered my dad's house around midnight. Inside the house was pitch black, and in my slightly drunken state I flipped on the light switch and nothing happened. Oh yeah, that's right, no power. Using my phone as a light to navigate my way through the house, over the creaky floorboards, I had noticed that some of the tools I had left lying around here, the house had been stolen. I sighed and accepted the fact that it's my own stupid fault for leaving them in an unsecure house. Some kids probably noted that no one is living here and took the advantage of the situation. It's unsettling knowing that someone has been in here, but I didn't bother calling the police over a hammer, wrench and screwdriver. That came to a grand total of £16.50. Good news was the big toolbox which I kept locked up in the laundry cupboard that houses my more expensive power tools was still there and intact. I studied the padlock and the space around it, and it looked pretty scratched up and dented, like someone had crudely attempted to prise it open. Nice try, dickheads, I said aloud to myself. The toolbox is very big and heavy, too big for one person to carry it, unless you're Andre the Giant. Exhausted, I went in to one of the furniture-less bedrooms and made my lift bed out of the blankets and pillows so I couldn't get comfortable. It was taking me a while to trip off to sleep. As I was lying there, the only sounds I could hear over the ringing of my tantrums was the gentle rustle of the winds through the trees. I could also hear what sounded like unmistakable crunch of boots on the gravel driveway that went up the side of the house. I tried to listen harder, then there was a loud gong voice sound of something solid coming into contact with the metal railing that reached up to the back door. Just makes me sit up wide-eyed while my heart rate starts to increase. Maybe this is a wallaby or possum. I sat there, in still as possible, just listening, and I can hear the sound of the trees in the wind and nothing else for a few moments. Now I started to calm down. This was interrupted by the pop and squeak of the back door being pushed open. Crap. I freeze, not knowing what to do. I could hear footsteps creaking through the back of the door of the house. I heard the laundry cupboard being opened. I was up the other end of the hallway, but I could hear the whispering. The only words I could hear. Shh. Quick. I pulled myself together and pulled out my phone to call the police. I tried to dispatch her while burying my head under the pillow to muffle my voice. I explained the situation to the dispatcher and she says the police are on their way. While this is happening, I can hear a crink sound coming from, I'm assuming was the lock of the toolbox trying to be opened. The dispatcher suggests that the lock of the door I'm in. I agree, and I slowly pad over across to the room I was in to lock the door. They must have heard me. For about 30 seconds of standing, I still tried to take another step, and yet tried not to make another creak. But this seems to work in my favour, because here my new house guests scatter away from the back door. I lock the bedroom door and tell the dispatcher I think they're gone. She tells me to stay put until the police arrive, and I tell her I'm more than happy to comply. About 5 minutes later, the cops arrive and the dispatcher bids me farewell. The police did a search of the area and found nothing as expected. They tried to break open the toolbox. One of the cops said, "Why didn't they use bolt cutters? Bloody amateurs." And we have a little laugh explained to the police about how when I came home, some of the tools that I left saying around were stolen, and that the toolbox looked like it had already attempted to be breaking in. Upon hearing that, the cops stated his theory about what events took place here. They probably broke in earlier tonight before you got here. They grabbed what they could, tried to open the toolbox but couldn't, and when they left to go get something to open with, while they were gone you came home and they arrived back to open the toolbox. I doubt they were dangerous, it's probably just kids. Good timing to think, I think to myself. I made a report, that's that. I stayed up until sunrise and decided to get a couple hours sleep until my mate's wife Lucy came to pick me up to collect the car. I asked if I could keep my tools in the place for safekeeping. I drove down to my dad's old folks' home and had Christmas lunch with him and his new elderly buddies. The following day, I go to a hardware store and purchased some newer study locked doors. But I kind of agree with that officer's warning. Well, theory, I guess. But I doubt they were dangerous, but they were just kids. But something in me, something deep down, doubts that very much. Christmas is that time of the year to be happy, merry, joyful, at least for most people. I love spending Christmas with my family and friends. My joyful mood usually translates to my co-workers as well. I work in customer service, which many people know as a nightmare at Christmas time, so it helps to try and stay upbeat. Well, there's one specific Christmas. Customers were doing some final Christmas shopping before Christmas Day. Right near the end of my shift, I cashed out a pretty normal looking guy. I would say the average height range of like 5'7" and maybe 150 pounds. And he looked like he was in his mid-40s. He was buying some very normal stuff and not really saying anything Christmas related. The whole interaction was mostly friendly until the very end when I said something I now wish I didn't say. I ended our transaction by saying in my bubbly voice, "Thank you sir and have a happy holiday." He stopped and turned back to me. He's like, "What did you just say?" I responded, "Have a happy holiday." He stormed back to my register and screamed over the top of his lungs, "It's Merry Christmas." I backed away and so I panicked and said, "Okay sir, I'm sorry." He walked away mumbling to himself, but I could tell he was furious by his latest actions. For a couple of minutes, I kept staring outside and I could see him pacing back and forwards outside the store, still mumbling to himself. A few people actually came into the store and said there was someone outside talking about Christmas and Jesus' birthday. I began to panic, thinking this guy was coming to come back in the store or wait until I got out to try and follow me home or something. But luckily for me, my boyfriend worked at the same store as me and we got a lift. We left at 6 and at first I was relieved when I didn't see the man outside. We were almost at his car, but when we saw the man running after us from the side of the road, my boyfriend opened the car door and stepped on it. The man was still in a rage. That lady has no respect for Jesus or Christmas, and she should be punished. My boyfriend, confused, told the man to back away and leave us alone. And the crazy man actually tried to jump past my boyfriend to get into the car, or punish me, whatever that meant. My boyfriend slammed the guy to the ground and got into the car and drove off. Like fools, we decided to drive not to call 911 because we didn't want to bother them on Christmas Eve, and just wanted to forget the event. On Boxing Day, we did alert the store manager, but that was the worst holiday I've ever had. I love Christmas. Who doesn't? It's a great way to spend time with family. I really enjoyed just the spirit of the day in general. My whole family and I have just finished our beautiful Christmas dinner, and most of my family went into the living room to wait for me to exchange presents. Christmas Day was when we did presents with the grandparents and cousins. I was in the kitchen washing dishes with my brother Jake and my cousins Teresa. While I was washing dishes, looked out my window and thought I noticed somebody out of my shed. I didn't let it bother me because I figured it was some kind of shadow from the tree. After a few more minutes of washing, I noticed the figure again, and this time I was definitely sure it was a man. I told my brother and cousin to look out the window, but not make it obvious. They noticed it as well. We talked quietly amongst ourselves to try to figure out what we should do. Our thought was that this man was technically trespassing on our property, so we decided to call the police. They told us they would send somebody out to have a look right away. Trying not to panic, we hoped everything stayed how it should until the police showed up. But that wasn't as easy as I thought. The kids started to get restless, as well as the grandparents wondering what the hold-up was. Parents knew something wasn't right, but they did a very good job keeping everyone in the living room. After a couple of minutes, we noticed a man started to approach the house, and he wasn't alone. There were 3 more men that came out the shed, and he started to surround the house. Confused and terrified, we all tried to remain calm. What happened next was nothing but a Christmas miracle. The flashing lights appeared as a police car just pulled up beside of the house. They were able to catch one of the men, but the rest fled, while somehow not bringing any attention to everyone inside. I spoke to a cop outside, and he gave me this statement. Well, it turns out my cousin Teresa had broken up with her boyfriend several months before Christmas, and the man they detained was in fact her ex. Teresa was starting to see someone new, and this man figured that a new BF would be at the house for the Christmas party. The ex and his friends, who had clearly planned attacking him, always putting a good scare on him, I thought, until the officer informed us that my cousin's ex was equipped with a knife and brass knuckles in his back pocket. Luckily, nobody got hurt, and I'm actually sure what kind of trouble he got into for this. The rest of the night went smooth. We opened presents, but I had an uneasy feeling for the rest of the night that the other men might return and try and finish what they started. Being the father of 2 small children, Christmas Eve is usually a very early night for my family, because the kids wake me up around 6 AM for Santa's presents. At about 10 PM, I got into bed with my wife and started to fall asleep. Shortly after this, I was jolted awake by our doorbell. I jumped out of bed and ran downstairs, more angry than anything else. Some idiot rang my door at Christmas Eve after 11 PM with 2 small children asleep, without even thinking. I opened the door and said, "What the hell do you want?" It was an old man with a dirty black beard. He was wearing a red jacket and sweatpants. His face was filthy. He had a slow, haunting voice. "Please let old Chris Kringle come inside to get some warmth." I slammed the door in his face and said, "If you don't leave, I'll call the cops." The man was quiet for a while, and then knocked on the door again. I yelled one more time, trying not to wake up my kids, "Do you want to be arrested?" and then started to bang on my door ferociously. My wife then ran downstairs, who I might add is 3rd degree black belt, and asked what was going on. I told her to call the police and make sure the kids are okay. That man must have heard me on the phone because he stopped knocking. I could hear him muffled through the door say "Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night," and then he laughed and he walked away. After a feeling of slight moment of relief, thinking the ordeal was done, I decided to wait right at the front door until the police showed up. A cop showed up several minutes later, and I explained the situation to him. He stated that he had no other calls or similar reports that night, and
when I heard my wife scream from the kitchen. The police officer headed up first, right behind me. The man was trying to break into my window where my daughter slept. The cops immediately tased and arrested him. And he kept saying, "Don't worry, I'm Santa Claus," over and over again. The situation was never really explained to me. Apparently he was a homeless man who was wandering around. The cops said he may have been drunk or on drugs. Either way, I never slept quite well that Christmas. This happened 2 years ago, but I always think about it. Every Christmas Eve, we spend the evening with my grandparents. That's where we feast and swap presents with cousins, all the people who won't be on Christmas morning. It was a very festive evening, and spirits were high, if not a little worn out from on our way to the house. Pulling into the driveway, we instantly felt something was off. The corner of the house, decorations-wise, were hanging off the roof, and something else we couldn't pinpoint right away. Lucky the kids were already asleep, and soothing dark car ride, so we sat in the driveway, the motor off and ticking as it starts to cool. Did we leave that many lights on outside? My husband asked me, because he would never use a sticker for turning on out lights before we leave. I shook my head no. The Christmas tree was the only thing we left on, but now there was soft glows from the window at two ends of the house. One being the primary living room area towards the front where we were, and the other the window at the left side of the house. The whole way by our bedroom and is slightly lit the side yard between our house and the neighbours. We both agreed that it looked like someone was or had been in our home. Called the cops, saying the door's locked, he said as he ran into the house. I didn't bother getting out. I just slid over to the centre console into the driver's seat just in case. He had concealed carry permit, so he drew his weapon and went to check the front door. It was still locked, so we unlocked it. At the time I started telling the police that our house seemed suspicious and thought someone might be in it. They of course said we should wait outside, but I know there was no use in telling my husband that he was already starting inside and flickering on more lights. It was nerve-wracking to sit there and watch the open front door, waiting for something to happen. Luckily nothing did happen. The cops pulled up and I let my husband know who was inside and what he was wearing, since he did have his gun out, but all the openings and shutting of the car door alerted him and woke the kid, so he'd come back to the front door with his gun back under his jacket. I went back to keep the kids busy while he talked to the cops, and then the cops cleared the house. Our visitors were no longer there, but they had broken in and through the back door. Many other Christmas presents were gone. The heaviest ones, it seemed, that as I bought most of them, and they had been left on their own. A large pile of poop and back porch mat decorations I had up inside completely everywhere. But apart from that was it. But every time it's Christmas time, always remember to lock your doors, just in case. The events of this story happened several years ago. During the course of that year, I was overseas. My company had a branch in Europe, and I decided I would work there for a year or so. For the most part, it was beautiful, and I had a really great time learning the culture and meeting people. But during the holiday time, especially around Christmas, it would get very lonely and it makes me homesick. My family and friends still lived back in the United States and could not afford to come see me, and because of my job I was stuck in Europe for the time being. On Christmas I stayed home in my apartment and decided to watch movies. After watching Netflix for a couple of hours I got bored and was looking for something to entertain me for a while. Quick backstory about me: when I was in high school, my friends and I used to crack the service of using a dark web. We were all pretty computer savvy and thought we were cool for being able to access it as a young age. We didn't do anything besides just surf around the dark web, but at the time it was a pretty cool thing. Honestly, it seemed pretty harmless, but what could go wrong? What could go wrong about me looking at the dark web? I searched through dozens of dead end links and pages, and nothing really seemed to spark my interest. After an hour of surfing, I decided it was time for bed. I closed everything down and went to the bathroom. When I came out, I noticed my webcam screen was up. Being a little naive, I didn't think anything of it and just closed it down. As I turned away, it popped up again, and I stood and I watched it for several seconds, trying to comprehend what was happening. My phone buzzed. In my pocket, it was a text from a private number that said, "I can see you." Beyond creeped out, I decided to get worried. I decided to shut off my lights and turn off the computer. But before I could, I had an email pop up on my computer. An email was a picture of my apartment building. I unplugged my computer and grabbed a knife from the kitchen and stood in the corner of my apartment. Almost immediately after unplugging the computer, I had another text. Through that, "I hope your door's locked." I couldn't comprehend what was happening. I was frozen in fear. All I could think about was something happening while I was on the dark web. I wasn't sure. For hours I stood in my dark apartment, staring at the windows and doors. Every little noise made me jump out my skin. Every time I heard somebody in the halls, I was getting ready for self-defense. This was Christmas night, in the middle of the night at this point. There was no way there should be that much foot traffic in the hallway, but I heard it. Back and forth. I heard footsteps all night long, but never actually anybody standing in the doorway or anything. Morning came, and I still have not slept or hardly moved all night. At about 8:30, somebody knocked on my door. So I approached the door, not knowing what was at the door, but it was my neighbour. I opened the door and greeted him. "Hope you had a nice Christmas," he said to me in an almost excited voice. I just nodded and said, "You too." In his cheerful morning voice, he said, "Somebody dropped off this letter for you this morning, and it was for you. But they said they couldn't talk to you for some reason." I took the letter, knowing deep down where it truly came from. I asked, "What did he look like?" And he responded, well, he was actually a chef, and he was pretty, dark hair, pretty smile. I said thanks and shut the door. Standing right there, I opened the letter, and it's a Christmas card from Santa on the front. And inside the card was written as forward. It started with my name, my full name, and it read as forward. "I hope you had a nice Christmas. I am sad you never came out in the hall to meet me and my friends. I guess there's always next year. Merry Christmas." I left right there and then. I grabbed a few things I needed to check into a hotel. I stayed for a couple of nights, returning back to the States, and told my bosses I was having some medical emergency, and I felt more comfortable finishing out my contract in the States. Never contacted the police and had no other any problems again. But what still gets me to this day is that letter. "Hope you had a nice Christmas. I'm sad you never came to meet me in the halls with my friends. I guess there's always next year." That always has creeped me out, and I don't think I could go through this again. I was at my friend's house. They lived across the street from my grandparents, and they were having a Christmas party. It was about 7 p.m, and where I live, it gets extremely dark quickly. My grandparents told my sister and I to be home at 8. I was 12 at the time. My twin sister and I had decided it was time to go, and decided to take a shortcut since it was dark. We usually took this shortcut, so it wasn't anything new. We started down the hill, which was pretty steep, and I got an uneasy feeling. I turned to my sister and told her about this, and she brushed it off. After all, I was pretty paranoid. She turned off on her phone flashlight because she wanted me to stop panicking, and we continued down the hill. I stopped for a minute or so later because I thought I saw something. This was the best thing that happened because there was someone there. I turned to my sister and told her I saw someone, and she saw them too. She had a cold and could barely speak, but she only managed to spit out, "Run." As soon as she said this person may be 8 yards away, so he started walking towards us. I started screaming at the top of my lungs, and my sister and I ran down the steep hill and got back to my friend's house. Only our grandparents and friends believed us, so it didn't go any further than telling our parents. When we went back to that place the next day to find a candy wrapper and a large blueprint. To that person that met us in the night, let's not meet again. I work at a beauty store today. An older man with a big white beard came in. I greeted him and asked if there was anything I can help him with. He took out his hand and he said, "Hi, I'm Santa Claus." I go to shake his hand as I laugh uncomfortably. As I try to pull my hand away, he stops shaking my hand and just holds it and proceeds to tell me that how he's popping the next town over us as Santa and how their local beauty store knows him very well. He held out my hand for a solid 2 minutes. He told me about his stories about being Saint Nick. He finally let me go after I tried pulling away several times, and then finally asked me where the coloured hairspray was so he can make his beard appear whiter. After helping him, I took him to the register to ring him up, and as I tell him his total, he hands me his card with a picture of Santa Claus on it, and he said "Happy Holidays" on it. I take it and says "Thank you," and he then pulls out another card but keeps his face down. And he says, "Now this one is my pride and joy. When I give this to you, I want you to keep it for yourself, not to show anyone. Not your husband, not your boyfriend, nobody." I was so uncomfortable, and that's all I wanted for this man to leave the store. He made me promise I wouldn't show another soul, which made me even more uncomfortable. I nervously took the card in hopes that he would leave sooner. I quickly turned the card over and glanced at it. Thankfully, it was a picture of a wax bottle that said "Pride" and a dish cleaning bowl that said "Joy." The jokes seemed innocent dad jokes until what he said next. He then proceeds to ask me how long I've been working here, what days do I work, what my hours. I just answered by saying I'm not sure over and over again, since I find those things to be personal information. And then he asks me how many other girls are there in the store. I told him I didn't really know. As I told him his total for the third time, he finally hands me the money, and as I give him the receipt, and then he tells me if I'm married, do I have a boyfriend? And I say no. And then after God knows how long, he's finally left. But I went home that night thinking, why was he asking me this personal information? If he was Santa Claus, why was he asking me this? So, to that creepy Santa I found in that store that day, let's not meet again. Before I met my husband, I came home from graduating college and I met a guy at the bar. His name was Matt, and he was a friend of my friend Kevin. I was hanging out with Kevin one night, and when I got talking to Matt, he seemed cool and he asked me out. I agreed to go dinner with him for that following weekend. Matt picked me up and we went out to dinner. Dinner was nice but a little boring. He then took me back to his house so he can get something. Before we went to the bar, he took me into his disgusting house. He had 18 cats and could smell the house before he walked in, and left me in the living room with his mum while he dug around in his room for whatever he was looking for. I still don't know. what it was. His mum asked me my name, and he started asking me questions like wanting to get to know her future daughter-in-law. When he came out of his room, she started gushing at him how pretty smart and how much of an improvement I was, and that he picked a great girl to marry. It had been 10 minutes. We went to the bar and had a decent time, although I was a bit creeped out. He took me home and everything was fine. He texted me the next day and told me that although I had a nice time, I wasn't really feeling that spark and offered that we could be friends. It was summer, so I texted that, and then I got in the pool. When I got out of the pool, I had 17 missed calls, 8 Facebook messages, and 6 texts of paragraphs from Matt asking me if he would give him another chance to show how good guy he is. I told him I was firm on my decision and I blocked him on Facebook, as well as his number. That evening, my friend Joe came over. Joe had a blue truck. I got a text from that number that I didn't know saying, "Who's at the blue truck? Is that your boyfriend?" I didn't respond. This happened numerous times and he somehow kept texting me from different numbers. I was watching for about a week, asking all of my comings and goings, my outfits. I could never find him where I looked, even in my small development. I called the police and they couldn't find him either. They told me in our state, unless he could physically harm me, there's nothing they could do. Things died down in the fall and I didn't hear anything from for a while. But on Christmas Eve I enjoyed time with my family and there was a knock on the door. My now husband answered the door and Matt, standing at the door, turned white as a sheet. He had a cart and a bottle of vodka, which he said was shoved at my now husband and then left. The card said, "I think it's time to reconnect and for you to give me another chance." The seal on the bottle was broken, so we poured it down the sink in case there was something funky in it. On New Year's Day, my now husband had to work and I went out with my girlfriend to a local bar. Matt was at a New Year's Eve party and had a lot to drink. Someone at the party was friends with my girlfriend on Facebook and then told him that we tagged ourselves in the bar and that my now husband wasn't tagged. Matt then decided that he was going to come find me. Needless to say, Matt wrapped his car around a tree doing 65 miles per hour on a back road in the snow, drunk off his ass when he was arrested, and he mentioned me by name and told the cops he was coming to find me. Turns out Matt had a pill problem and wanting in another state for felony possession, writing bad checks. Matt's now in jail, and that's how a creeper got his karma. It was Christmas Eve night of 2010. My kids have already gone to bed. Me and my wife were wrapping the presents ready for the Christmas morning. And then I decided to go into the basement to get some of the leftover presents and ready for the food ready for tomorrow. I headed down into the basement and then I saw a random chair that I've never seen before. And I get a bit paranoid because there's no way the chair could be in there unless I put it in there. And I'm the only one who goes in this basement, so it's even more weird. And then I noticed one of the floorboards had been cracked. And not just like broken, but literally snapped off. And there's like a hole going underneath the house. And it's big enough for me to fit through. I jumped down and then I noticed a lad on the other side. Don't know, that means somebody must be down here. And then I turned on my phone's flashlight and just did a bit of a wander around. It was dark. I couldn't see anything. The only thing I could see was the bits in front of me, but that wasn't very far. I could only see up until my hand. I walked into a door, and I thought to myself, why was there a door here? I opened the door, and it was like a scene from like a horror movie. There was blood, guts, entrails everywhere. It was like
torture scene from a horror movie, and then I see people being hanged, like it's like shopping rags, like in clothes shops, it's like that, but with hanging corpses. I nearly threw up right there and then. And then I noticed a figure in the upper right hand in the corner. And then he turned around. He had no pupils. And he didn't look human at all. And then he started walking towards me. I was already out of that room by then. And then I didn't have anything to defend myself with. He started chasing me as well. And then when I finally got to the ladder, he started to climb up the ladder, but then I punched him. And then he fell to the floor, presumably dead. I was like, did I just kill him? I had no time to worry about that. I clogged up the hole as quick as I could and ran back upstairs to pretend that nothing happened. I didn't bother calling the cops because I don't have a reason, I just didn't. But to this day, I've still not told anyone about this. And that's probably the biggest mistake I've probably ever made. And to this day, I still don't know if that man in there was alive or not. I hope he wasn't, because he deserves to die for what he did to those people in there. It was Christmas Eve of 2006. My parents had just went to bed and I couldn't sleep. When you're younger at Christmas time, it's usually the worst night to get to sleep, because you can't stop thinking about what you're going to get in the morning. But I did finally manage to get to sleep. Well, forward up anyway. I woke up around 3 AM and I heard rustling from downstairs, like stuff being placed on the floor and the Christmas tree moving. And then I suddenly got that realization that Santa must have come. I slowly tipped out of my bed and slowly walked down the stairs. I didn't try to make a scene just in case I would wake my parents up. And then I noticed a man dressed in a red and white suit with a white beard. And I noticed it was Santa. I just try not to make it obvious, because obviously when you're younger you don't want Santa to know you're awake. And then he noticed me. He waved at me, and I waved back. And he told me to come down. And he said, "Merry Christmas, little one. I've got all your presents, but don't tell anyone that you saw me. That's a great rule in my notebook. Do not tell your parents or anyone you saw me, or else it will jinx your luck. Go back to bed, little one." I nodded my head and went back to bed. Can't believe I just saw Santa, I thought to myself. I waved him good night, and then I finally got to sleep. In the morning, I heard screaming come from downstairs. I literally fell out of my bed running downstairs, and then my mum and dad were in tears because all the presents were gone. And then I told my parents what was wrong, and she told me to look in the box. It was the decapitated head of my little brother. He was chopped up to fit in the box. He saw me there. It made sense. The reason why he was so scared when he saw me is because he didn't want anyone to see him putting my brother in the box. And well, that day my parents had to tell me my Santa wasn't real, and my heart was really shattered. My childhood was pretty much ruined. But after that was the Christmas of 2006. Was officially the worst Christmas I've ever had. If you see a suspicious looking man in your house, if it's Santa or not, tell your parents, no matter who it is. If you think Santa is real, just tell your parents just in case, because I don't want any of this happening to anyone again, because it's just sick when you think about it.